Hi everyone, and welcome to my channel, Maths Made Easy with Terry in 10 minutes. So we're going to go straight to the 7 laws of sorts, and I'm going to talk about the laws that we're going to use in this series. Just to remind us, we talked about sorts, and I talked about the different types of sorts in the previous video. And what I want you to do now is that I want you to just go back, make sure you're looking at it, and make sure that you're sure you understood it. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about quickly, we just jump straight into it at the 7 laws of sorts. Now, the first one is what we call the product rule. All right, so it's what we call the product. So basically, from the product is how do you multiply surds, all right? Now, the first thing is that when square root of A multiply square root of B is going to give you what? Square root of AB. So basically, when you have two surds together multiplying each other, you just multiply the source value there. Now, what I'm going to do in this series is that I'm going to list all the rules, all the laws here, okay? Then in the subsequent videos, I'm going to use each video for each of the laws. Is that making sense? So that I'm not going to confuse us here. So that means to make it 10 minutes, I make it very easy. I'm going to list all the laws that we're going to talk about. And so it will be easy for us to understand. Is that okay? So we have square root of A times square root of B will give you square root of AB. The next one as well is that when you have the same sort, square root of A times square root of A, the answer is going to be what? A. All right? Now, when you have a rational number like A multiplied by square root of B, so a rational number and a surd is going to give you A root B. All right? Another one again could be when you have A root B multiplied by C or C root D. Is that okay? So that means you're having two sorts now. So remember, we talked about the different types of sorts. So you can go back and look at it. So now we are having a mixed sort. So I'm multiplying two mixed sorts together now. So what you do, you multiply the rational numbers together. So to be A times C, and you multiply the sorts together, and that will give you B times D. Is that okay? So that will give you AC root BD, all right? So in the next video, I'm going to talk about this in each and every one of them, but I'm going to just list them here. Is that okay? Then the next one we have is when you want to open the bracket as well. So you're having A multiplied by B plus C root D, okay? So you want to open the bracket. So it follows the same algebra method, okay? And for those that have missed my video on expanding the bracket with algebra, I would advise you to go back and have a look. There, I explained when you have A plus B plus C, I told you it's going to be A times B. That will give you AB. And I told you that's going to be A times C. That's going to give us what? AC. So the same thing, it will be A times B. That will give us AB. And A times CD, similar to this rule here. Are you seeing it? So it's going to give us AC root D. Is that making sense? The same thing, if it's a negative sign, the same rule will apply. If it's B minus CD, all right, C root D is going to give us AB minus AC root what? D. Okay. And that are the subsequent the rules for the products rule, okay? So the next one is we're going to talk about is what we call the quotient. Now, some textbook we call it quotient, some we call it division. They're all the same thing. So you can call it a product rule, you can call it a quotient rule, all will give you the same answer. So what it's just trying to say is that when you have something like root A divided by root B, it's still the same thing as writing it as root A over B. Is that okay? And we also talked about A root B divided by C root D, okay? Something like this is the same thing as saying A over C, so the rational numbers, you divide it separately, is that okay? The rational numbers, you divide it separately, then you now divide the roots as well, it will be B over D. So the same rule, because it's dividing, you divide it as well, okay? Then the last one I'm going to talk about here is if you have root A divided by root A, this will give you what? 1, okay? So the first rule is the product rule, the second rule is the division rule, okay? I'm going to solve questions on each of this, all right? So what I would just advise you, for those that understand this already, see this as a form of revision to remind yourself. If it's your first time, just take note of it, okay? In the subsequent video, I'm going to pick each of these rules and solve examples on them. So we're done with the quotient rule. The next one is what we call the addition and subtraction. So addition and subtraction, okay? The addition and subtraction is very simple. So the first one is if you have root A plus root B. Now in this, we have two different what? Surds, and you want to add them together, all right? If there are two different surds, you can't do anything. The answer remains what? The same, okay? Now, it does not matter if it was addition or it was subtraction. The same thing happens. Nothing is going to change. The same answer you will what? You will get. Are you seeing it? Now, but this is different when we have the same sorts. So let's say we have A root B plus C root B. Now, you can see in this case that both sorts are the same. All right? So what you do, you add the rational numbers together, A plus C, and that will give you what? Root B. Now, if the same thing applies, if it's a negative as well. So A root B minus C root B. Now, they are different. It's going to be the same thing, A minus C root what? B. Now, the trick is that when it's different, it stays the same. All right, you don't do anything. If it's different, you don't do anything. But if it's the same, all right, then you add the rational numbers. So the numbers outside, you add them together to give you the other one inside. Okay, so that will be that for number 3. Okay, so moving to number 4 now. So for number 4, we're going to talk about multiplication. All right, so we'll talk about the addition and subtraction rule. Now we're going to talk about multiplication. So how do you multiply surds? Okay, so multiplication rule. All right, so we have the first one. So if you have root A plus root B multiplied by root A plus root B, something like this. Now, this also multiplication follows algebra as well. For those that have watched my video on expanding of brackets, okay, you will be conversant with when I talked about A plus B multiplied by C plus D. I told you A times C will give you AC, and I told you A times D will give you what? AD. And I also told you that B times C will give you BC, and B times D will give you what? BD. So basically, you use the elements in the first bracket to open all the elements in the second bracket, right? Now, the same thing exactly is what you're going to do here as well. You're going to use the elements in the first bracket to open the elements in the what? To multiply the elements in the second bracket. So for example, in this case, you will notice as well that we have a value of root A and root B in this part here. So what do? It's going to be root A multiplied by root A. Now, you already see it from the rule already. We say when root A multiplied by root A is going to give us what? A. So that means root A multiplied by what? Root A is going to give us A. So we're going to do that quickly. So the first one that is going to multiply, root A times root A will give us A. Root A times root B. You can see from this rule here, root A times root B will give us what? AB. Are you seeing it? So here is going to give us what? Root A is going to give us root AB. Okay? The same thing, root B times root A. So remember we said this is going to open this one. So we're going to start with this now. Root B times root A. That is going to give us root AB. and root b times root b, that is going to give us what? B. Then you add them together. So remember, for those that watch my video on the types of surds, so I told you for pure surds, when you see something like root 2, okay, it's the same thing as saying 1 root 2. So technically there is a 1 outside, okay, for pure surds. So remember I told you, when you're adding and dividing, okay, you add the numbers outside. So technically, I can write this as 1 root AB plus 1 root what? AB. So we're going to add a 1 plus 1, and that will give us what? 2 what? Roots AB. So remember we told you, when the surds are the same, you just add those values what? Together. So it's going to give us A plus root AB. We have 1 here, and that'll give us 2 roots AB plus B. Okay, that will give us 2 root AB plus B. Okay, and that's how you get the answers for that. Now, similarly, for other forms of multiplication, you will get the same thing. So if, for instance, you had, let's say you had root A minus root B, okay, and root A minus root B. The same thing, you multiply. Root A times root A will give you what? A. Root A times root B, that will give us plus, but this is minus now. Are you seeing it? This is minus, so that will give you minus root AB. The same thing, we have root B times root B, but it's minus root B times root B, and that will give you minus root what? AB. Then finally, we have minus root B times minus root B, minus times minus, so we have minus root B times minus root B. So minus times minus will give you plus, so B times root B will give you B. So you're going to have plus B, okay? So that's how you get the values there. So then as usual, you add the numbers outside, so you can look at there's a 1 here and there's a 1 here if you want to help you. So minus 1 is going to give you what? Minus 2 root AB plus B. And that will be the answer for that. Okay? Then maybe I can throw in 1 again. If they are different, it's going to be the same thing. So if, for instance, you have root A plus root B multiplied by root C plus what? Root D. Now, the surds here are different. So the same thing is going to be root A times this will give you root AC. Root A times D will give you what? Root AD. Root B times this will give you what? Root what? BC. Root B times root D will give you what? Root what? BD. And that will be the answer for what? For that. Okay? And that's how you do the multiplication. So basically, the multiplication follow the concept of expanding the what? The bracket. So we've talked about 4 rules now already. We've talked about the product. We've talked about the quotient. We've talked about addition and subtraction and multiplication. The next one I'm going to talk about is the conjugate rule, okay? Or the conjugate law. So the next one is the conjugate rule. So I'm going to explain when I get to the video on conjugate. So basically, when we talk about conjugate, we're talking about numbers that have different signs. The elements are the same, but the signs are different. So for example, when you talk about conjugate, we have, let's say we have A plus root B. What it means is that the conjugate for this is going to be A minus root B. So basically, when we say something is a conjugate, it means it's the same thing, but the signs are what? Different. Okay? So if you have A minus root B, the conjugate will be what? A plus what? Root B. If you have A root B plus root C, the conjugate is going to be A root B minus what? Root C. Is that okay? So usually when we get there, I'm going to explain is that the reason why we multiply by conjugate is that we want to take away the root sign. I'm going to talk about that very soon. But one of the things you should know is that when we multiply conjugates, okay? So multiplication of conjugates. So it's one of the things I wanted to just bring out here. So multiplication of conjugates, all right? So how do you do multiplication of conjugates? So the first one we have, so let's say we have root A plus root B. Now the conjugate for this is going to be root A minus what? Root B. Same thing, it's going to follow the expanding of brackets. So remember, I told you in the previous video, when you have something like this to expand it, it will be A times C, that will give you AC. It will be A times D, that will give you what? AD. It will be B times C, that will give you BC, and B times D, that are going to give us BD. All right? So the same thing is going to be root A times what? Root A, that will give you A. Root A times minus root B will give you minus root what? AB. Root B times root A is going to give us plus root AB. And root B times minus root B will give you minus what? B. Now you can see, remember I told you in the law that when you're adding that have the same, you add the powers and the rational numbers outside. Now, if you look at this one, we have minus root AB plus root AB. Like I told you, we have 1 in front of it. So minus 1 plus 1 will give us what? 0. So that means all this will cancel what? Will cancel out. And you have A minus what? B. So this is why we have conjugates. So basically, when you multiply conjugate, the square root sign disappears, and you're now left with what? The number itself. Is that all right? So when you multiply conjugates together, your answer can't have a square root sign. So that's one of the tips I want you to keep in mind, that when you have conjugates and you're multiplying conjugates together, they can never ever have what? A root sign. I'm going to pick one more so to just make it easy. So let's say we have square root of A plus B, for instance. So the conjugate for this is going to be square root of A minus B. The same thing, root A times root A is going to give you A. Root A times minus B, that's going to give us minus B root A, okay? Now the next one is that we're going to have B times root A, that will give us plus B root A. Now plus B minus B will give you minus what? B squared. Is that okay? So minus B plus B, remember you add, because they have the same roots, then we can add them together. So minus B plus B, and that will give us what? 0. So that means they'll cancel out. Is that okay? And you're now left with minus A minus B squared. That is that for that. So as you can see, when you're multiplying conjugate, when you follow the same rule of expanding the bracket, but your answer can never, okay, can never, ever, ever have a root sign. I'm going to have a video for that. So I'm just going to list all the 7 laws in this video so that it will be easy for you to revise, okay? Then you can navigate through the playlist to see which of the laws you want to just look around, or you want me to remind you, or you want us to review together. Now, number 6 is what we call rationalizing the denominator. Okay, rationalizing the denominator. So that is the 6th one, all right? So you can take notes of this in your notebook. You can just write it down. And what will happen is that at the end, you can go back, review, solve questions using this one, and it will be. Now, what you will notice is that usually in Surds, it's not allowed for you to have source at the denominator like this. Okay, like for instance, you can have maybe 3 over root 2. Usually it is not really acceptable, okay? Or you cannot have something like 3 over 2 plus root 2. Are you seeing it? Usually you can have source like this. So that is the reason why we rationalize the denominator. So we have some things to know. So for instance, if you have A over root B, what you do in order to avoid this, so if you remember that one of the rules I told you that I said for division, for the quotient, I said when you divide root A divided by root A will give you 1. So basically, when you multiply a source that is dividing itself is equal to 1. So that means we can apply this here. So we can multiply this, is rationalizing the denominator. So we can multiply this by the denominator here. So it's going to be root B over what? Root B. Actually, we've not done anything because root B over root B is 1. So technically, we've not changed anything. But when you multiply this, it's going to be A times root B. That will give you what? A root B. Then root B times root B, that will give you what? B. So you can see that we've converted A root B to now A root B over B. We don't have surds as the denominator. Is that okay? So when you have a simple fraction like this, what you do, you multiply by the denominator, both top and bottom. Now, the second one is that when you are having R over P plus Q root N, all right? So what you do with this one is that you multiply by the conjugate. You remember for conjugate, I told you that a conjugate of a number or of a surd is that same surd, could be a compound surd, is that same surd, but a different sign. Is that okay? So the conjugate of the denominator here is going to be P minus Q root N. Are you seeing it? So it'll be P minus Q root N. So you can see in this case now that when you multiply, it's going to give you R multiplied by P minus Q root N divided by, now we talked about expanding bracket. So we have P plus Q root N multiplied by what? P minus Q root N. So like I said, you're going to use the first element to multiply. So you're going to use P first to multiply to give you P squared. So we're going to have this first to give you P squared. Then P is going to multiply this, and that will give you, so P multiplied by minus Q root N, and that will give you minus P Q root N. Are you seeing it? Then this is going to give us this one. So Q root N times P is going to give us plus P Q root N. And it's going to give us Q root N times this is going to give us what? So it's plus times minus is going to give us minus, and that will give us what? Q squared. Now root N times root N is going to give us what? N. Are you seeing it? So that means minus PQ plus PQ will cancel out. Can you see? And you're going to be left with P squared minus Q squared what? N. So it's going to give us what? P squared minus Q squared N. So that's how you get that. So we can finally write this as RP. Let me clean this up. All right. So we can write this now as RP minus RQ root N divided by P squared minus Q squared N. All right. Then the next one, the same thing will happen, okay? Now, in this case, I want you to try this one, but if we have minus here, all right? So when you multiply, you're going to multiply by when it's plus, so it's going to be plus Q root N divided by P plus what? Q root N. Then when you multiply, it's going to give you RP plus Q root N divided by, okay? Now, it's going to give you the same thing, which is P squared minus Q squared N, because it's exactly like what we did before. And that'll be RP plus RQ root N divided by P squared minus Q squared N. Okay. I'll just pick one more among concepts as well. Let's say we have R divided by P plus root Q. Okay. So the same thing, you're going to multiply by the conjugate. So regardless, when you have a compound surd, you multiply by the conjugate. But if it's just a simple surd, you multiply both denominator and just multiply by just the simple surd itself. Okay? So when it's a simple surd, like A over root B, okay, you multiply by the denominator, just that. But if it's a compound surd, you have to multiply by the conjugate. So you're going to multiply by P minus root Q over P minus root Q, all right? So that will give you RP minus root Q divided by, so we have the same thing. We have P plus root Q, all right? Then we have P minus root Q. So P times P will give you P squared. P times minus root Q will give you minus P root Q. Root Q times P will give you plus P root Q, plus P root Q, okay? And plus root Q minus root Q will give you minus what? Q. Minus PQ minus P plus PQ, this will cancel out, and you'll be left with P squared minus what? Q. So we're gonna have P squared what? Minus Q. P squared minus Q. And when you open the bracket, it's gonna be RP minus R root Q divided by P squared minus what? Q. And that will be the answer for that. Okay, so that is the concept of rationalizing what? The denominator. So, like I said, these are the 6 rules. This is the 6th rule. Now, but like I told you, I'm going to have each of the video series to talk about each of them. So the reason why I made this video having all the rules, so in case maybe you want to revise before the exam, or you want to revise before a class test, you want to remind yourself of all the rules, you just go to this video and just quickly watch them. So you just remind yourself of all the rules of what sort. So we have the product rule, we have the quotient rule, we have when you're adding or subtracting, when you're multiplying, and when you have the conjugate. When you have conjugate and multiply, the root disappears. And yes, and I need to also know something here. So like I said, when you're rationalizing, if it's a simple sort, like in A, like you can see, this is a simple sort. The denominator is simple. If you just simple sort, all right, you just multiply by the sort, okay, top and bottom. But if it's a compound sort, so compound sorts are simple sorts that has a rational number. So we talked about that in my previous video. A compound sort, you use the what? The conjugate, all right? So if it's a compound sort, you use a conjugate, but if it's a simple sort, you just multiply by the sort itself. Okay, all right. Let's go to the last one. The last one is what we call the equality rule. Number 7, the equality, all right? Equality of sorts, all right? Equality rule. Now, the equality rule is very simple. The first one says if a minus root x is equal to a minus root y, okay? So therefore, so that means they both have the same what? Rational numbers. So they are compound sorts, but they have the same rational numbers. So that means x must be equal to what? Y. Is that making sense? I'll solve questions for that. And also, it also says that if, for instance, you have a plus root x is equal to 0, for this to be true, a must be equal to 0 and x must also be equal to what? 0, all right? So the same thing if it was a negative as well. So if you have a minus root x is equal to 0, then therefore a must be equal to 0 and what? X must be equal to what? 0. All right. Now, I know this was a long video, okay? So I just wanted to put all the rules together so that it will be easy for you to revise, okay? All the rules together. So these are the 7 rules. So the first one we have is the product, the quotient, the addition and subtraction, the multiplication, the conjugate, rationalizing, and the equality, okay? So I'm going to go straight to the next video. The next video, I'm going to start from the first one. I'm going to discuss the product rule in the next video. So if you're not subscribed, please don't forget to do so that you can get notification when I upload a new video. So I'm going to see you in the next video, and I'm going to discuss the product rule.